Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We have a file on the desk today that is, frankly, is going to mess with your head a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't mean that in some kind of fun, abstract way. I mean, it's going to make you actively question the validity of every single decision you make for the next week.
It really is. It's one of those psychological phenomena where once you see it, once you understand the mechanics of it, you start seeing the matrix code everywhere.
The Matrix Code, I like that.
Yeah, you see it in the grocery store aisle, you see it when you're car shopping, in the courtroom, you see it in your salary negotiations. But I think the scariest place you see it is inside your own internal monologue.
And that is what we were talking about today, the anchoring effect. And to really, get our heads around this, we have to go back to the source. We're looking at the foundational work of Amos Tversky and the author of our primary text.
The pioneers.
Absolutely. And the origin story of this entire theory is, it's weirdly cinematic. It doesn't start with a clipboard and a survey in a sterile lab. It starts with a rigged game.
It literally starts with a rigged carnival game. And I think that the sheer absurdity of the setup is actually the most important part of the entire finding.
Okay, so set the scene for us. Where are we?
We're at the University of Oregon. It's the 1970s. You have these two titans of psychology, and they have built a wheel of fortune.
A literal wheel.
A literal physical wheel. Picture a standard game show wheel. It's big, it makes that satisfying clicking sound when it spins, and it's marked with numbers from 0 to 100.
Got it.
They recruit a bunch of university students to come into the lab, and they ask them to spin this wheel. But, and this is the key, unknown to the students, Amos and his collaborator had actually tinkered with the mechanics inside. They rigged it.
So it wasn't random at all?
Not even a little bit. No matter how hard you spun it or how gently, the wheel would only ever stop on one of two numbers.
Which were?
10 or 65.
Just those two, which is already, that's a fascinating study in psychological manipulation right there. Just gaslighting students with a broken wheel.
But that wasn't even the point of the study, was it?
No, not at all. The wheel was just the delivery mechanism for the number. So the student watches the wheel spin, it stops on, let's say, the number 10. The researchers ask them to write that number down on a piece of paper.
Got it.
Then, without missing a beat, they completely pivot to a totally unrelated topic. They ask two questions about the United Nations.
The United Nations. Okay, this is where it gets weird.
Question 1. Is the percentage of African nations among UN members larger or smaller than the number you just wrote down?
So in this case, is it larger or smaller than 10%?
Exactly. And seeing as 10% is, quite a low number, and most people have a general sense that there are a lot of countries in Africa, most people would intuitively say, oh, it's definitely larger.
Sure. That's a simple over or under bet. It doesn't seem that hard. It isn't. But then comes question 2, which is the actual test. And the question is, what is your best guess of the actual percentage of African nations in the UN?
Okay, now before you tell us the results, I really want to pause on the logic here, or I should say the complete lack of logic.
Right.
Because I want to stress for everyone listening how fundamentally irrational this setup is. The number that came up on the wheel is garbage data. It is pure noise.
It is pure, unadulterated, meaningless noise. Yes.
It's from a random number generator, a rigged one at that. It has absolutely zero logical connection to geopolitics or African history or the composition of the United Nations.
None whatsoever.
If I spun a wheel to help me guess the temperature on Mars, I shouldn't let that number influence my calculation one bit. It's just an event that happened in the room, a distraction.
Rationally, you should treat the wheel spin as an invisible event. You should say to yourself, okay, I saw a 10. That is irrelevant information. Now, let me access my internal database, my actual knowledge about Africa and the UN. You should be starting from scratch.
But that is not what the human brain does, is it?
Not even close.
So what did the students do?
Okay, get this. The students who saw the wheel stop on the number 10. They estimated, on average, that 25% of the UN was made up of African nations.
25%, okay. And the other group, the ones who saw 65?
The students who saw the wheel stop on 65. Their average estimate was 45%.
Wow. Wait, so 25% versus 45%, we're talking about nearly double the estimate.
It's a massive, massive gap, a huge statistical leap. And you have to remember, these are University of Oregon students. They aren't uneducated. They presumably have the same general pool of knowledge about the world.
Of course.
And the only variable that changed, the only thing different in their entire universe, was a completely arbitrary number that they saw on a rigged wheel.
This is our mission for today's deep dive, then. We have to figure out why. Why do these completely irrelevant numbers hijack our rational judgment? Why does a number we know is random pull our estimates toward it like some kind of, I don't know, a cognitive magnet?
Exactly.
Because if a simple wheel can do this to our judgment, what is a list price on a house doing to us? What is a salary range on a job posting doing to us?
That is the core definition of the anchoring effect. It occurs whenever people consider a particular value for an unknown quantity before they estimate that quantity. The estimate, it just stays close to the number they considered first.
Hence the image of the anchor.
Exactly. I mean, the metaphor is perfect. Imagine you're on a boat in a harbor. You drop an anchor. Now, the chain has some slack, right? So the boat can drift a little bit with the wind or the current.
Sure, it's not locked in place.
Right. But it cannot leave the harbor. It is physically tethered to that spot on the seafloor. The boat is your thought process. And the anchor is that first number you hear. You can move a little bit away from it, you can adjust, but you are never truly free of its influence.
What I found most compelling in the reading for this was this concept of the absurdity factor. I think most of us, we tend to assume that if a number is truly ridiculous, our brain will just reject it out of hand.
Right, that we have some sort of built-in nonsense detector.
Exactly. Like if I tell you a cup of coffee costs $1,000, you'll just laugh and ignore it. You won't start thinking, well, maybe it costs $500. You'll just dismiss it as an error or a joke.
You would think so. We like to believe our brains have a spam filter for this kind of thing. But the research suggests otherwise. The Wheel of Fortune was absurd because it was random. But there's another classic experiment involving Gandhi that shows how we react to informational absurdity numbers that are clearly factually wrong.
The Gandhi example, I love this one because it's so beautifully simple.
It is. So the researchers asked two different groups of people two different questions about when Gandhi died. Group A was asked this question. Was Gandhi more than 114 years old when he died?
Which is obviously ridiculous. The oldest person who ever lived was, 122? We know for a fact Gandhi didn't live to be 114. It's physically improbable.
Right. Your brain instantly flags it as false. You don't sit there and seriously contemplate if he was a supercentenarian. You just know it's wrong.
Okay.
But then they asked Group B a different question. Was Gandhi more than 35 years old when he died?
Also ridiculous, just in the other direction.
Yeah.
I mean, he was clearly an old man in all the photos we see. He wasn't some young revolutionary when he was assassinated.
Precisely. So in both cases, the anchor number is demonstrably, obviously wrong. But here's the kicker. After asking that initial ridiculous question, which acts as the anchor, they then asked both groups to give their best estimate of Gandhi's actual age of death. The people who were first anchored to the number 114 guessed a significantly higher age of death than the people who were anchored to 35.
Get out of here.
It's true. Even though 114 is an impossible age, it dragged the average estimate up. And even though 35 is clearly way too young, it dragged the average estimate down.
This just implies that we aren't as autonomous in our thinking as we like to believe we are.
Not at all.
We think we are retrieving pure facts from some clean, organized database in our brain. But what's actually happening is that the context, this random number that's just floating in the air, is coloring that entire retrieval process.
It shows that we don't just know things in a vacuum. We construct our answers. And we construct them using whatever materials are lying around in our short-term memory at that moment.
So if the number 114 is lying around,
it gets built into the answer. It's like you're trying to bake a cake and you've got all your ingredients, but someone just happens to leave a bottle of hot sauce on the counter next to you. Even if you don't mean to use it, just the fact that it's there influences what you're doing. It's in your field of vision.
Now, digging into the theory here, I noticed a little bit of historical drama in the source material. It seems the author and Amos Tversky, who are usually, intellectually inseparable, they actually disagreed on why this was happening.
They did. It's one of the rare instances where these two giants of psychology really couldn't get on the same page about the underlying mechanism.
So what was the debate?
Well, Amos had a very specific, very structural view. He thought anchoring was a kind of strategy, a heuristic. He called it adjust and anchor.
Adjust and anchor. So
Mm.
in Amos's view, it's a deliberate, conscious process.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. He believed it was a system two effort, system two being the slow, deliberate, analytical part of our brain.
The one that does the hard work.
Right. His theory was that you start with the anchor number, you recognize it's probably wrong, and then you mentally adjust away from it until you reach a number that feels plausible. You think 114 is too high for Gandhi, so you start subtracting years in your head until you hit a number that feels about right.
Okay, that makes some sense. But the author of our text disagreed.
He did. He felt that didn't explain everything. He looked at that same Gandhi example and said, wait a minute, if I ask you if Gandhi was 114, you aren't really mentally adjusting down from 114. It's too absurd.
Yeah, you don't start by thinking 114 is a real possibility and then start shaving off years one by one.
No, you reject it instantly. So the author believed it was something else. He called it suggestion or priming, a system one function, the automatic, fast, associative part of the brain.
So who won the argument?
Well, this is the fascinating part. As it turns out, decades of subsequent research have painted a really interesting picture. They were
Yeah.
both right.
Both of them. How can that be?
It's not one single mechanism. It's two distinct mechanisms that can work in parallel, or one can take over from the other depending on the context. Sometimes we are deliberately adjusting, and other times we are being subconsciously primed.
Okay, let's unpack the first one then. Let's start with Amos's theory. Anchoring as adjustment. This is the system two process. The idea is we start at the anchor and we consciously move away from it. Why does that lead to errors? If I know the anchor's wrong, why don't I just adjust all the way to the right answer?
Because adjustment is hard work. It's mentally expensive. Our brains are fundamentally lazy. The cognitive process goes something like this. You are given an anchor. You say, nope, that's wrong. You start moving away from it in your mind, but, and this is the crucial flaw, you stop moving as soon as you reach the edge of what psychologists call the region of uncertainty.
Region of uncertainty. I want to stick on that phrase. Define that for us.
Okay, let's use the simple paper experiment described in the source. And for everyone listening, you can visualize this right now. Imagine I give you a blank sheet of paper and a pencil. And I ask you to draw a line starting from the bottom of the page, going up until it is exactly 2.5 inches long. You don't have a ruler, you just have to eyeball it.
Okay. I'm drawing up from the bottom. I'm estimating. I stop where I think 2.5 inches is.
Right. Now take another sheet of paper. This time, start at the top of the page. And draw a line going down until it is 2.5 inches long.
And when you compare the two lines,
There is a very consistent, very robust finding that your first line, the one drawn from the bottom up, will almost always be shorter than the second line you drew from the top down.
but why? 2.5 inches is an objective length. The reality of it shouldn't change based on the direction my pen is moving.
It changes because you don't actually know exactly what 2.5 inches looks like. You have a range in your mind, a maybe zone. Let's say for you, your brain thinks 2.5 inches is somewhere between, say, 2.2 inches and 2.8 inches.
Okay, that's my zone of uncertainty.
Exactly. When you start from the bottom, your anchor is effectively 0 inches. You draw upwards, and as soon as your line hits the very bottom edge of that maybe zone, let's say 2.2 inches, your brain says, stop. That's plausible.
I stop at the first plausible point I come to.
You got it. But when you start from the top of the page, you're coming down. So you hit the top edge of that uncertainty zone first, the 2.8 inches, and your brain says, stop. That's plausible. So you stop there. The gap between the bottom edge and the top edge of your own personal uncertainty is your margin of error, and the anchor you start with determines which side of that margin you get stuck on.
So the adjustment is always insufficient. We are lazy adjusters.
Lazy is a little harsh, but yes, cognitive laziness is a real thing. Our brains are built to conserve energy. We stop adjusting the moment we are no longer absolutely certain that we should move further. This explains so much about common everyday errors, particularly when it comes to driving.
Oh, the driving example was terrifyingly relatable. I think every single person listening has felt this.
Right. The researchers Robin LaBouffe and Eldar Shafir pointed this out. Think about when you're driving on a freeway at, say, 75 or 80 miles per hour. Your brain is calibrated to that speed. That is your anchor.
Right, that's normal.
The visual flow, the sound of the engine, the feeling of the road, it all sets a baseline of what normal speed feels like. You're flying along.
And then you take an exit ramp.
When you take an exit ramp, the signs say 35 miles per hour. You hit the brakes, you feel like you have slowed down massively.
It feels like you could get out and walk. I mean, you feel like you're practically stationary.
Exactly. But if you actually look down at your speedometer, you're probably still doing 50, maybe 55. You anchored at 80. You adjusted down until it felt slow, which happens way before you actually hit the objective safe target of 35.
Yeah.
You stopped adjusting at the top edge of your uncertainty zone. You didn't adjust all the way down to the correct speed because your body told you that you had already done enough work.
The other example they gave, which just made me laugh out loud, was the teenager with the loud music. It's the exact same mechanism, right?
It is identical. And I'm telling you, understanding this resolves so many domestic disputes. The teenager starts from a high anchor, the music is blasting, the parent yells from downstairs to turn it down. The teen adjusts the volume down to a level that, to them, feels like a massive concession. They've moved from deafening to just loud.
They stopped adjusting the moment it felt lower.
Right. They feel like they've compromised. But the parent is coming from the completely other side of the problem.
The parent is anchored at 0, at silence.
Precisely. So to the parent, the newly adjusted volume is still a full-on assault on the senses. It's still way too loud. So both sides feel like they're being totally reasonable. The teen thinks, I turned it down, why are you still yelling at me? And the parent thinks, it's still blasting, you're just ignoring me. The conflict isn't about disrespect, it's about two people starting from completely different anchor points and both failing to adjust sufficiently.
So is there any way to actually prove that this adjustment process takes real mental effort? That it's not just some kind of reflex? Because, it feels pretty automatic.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there was a very clever study by Nick Epley and Tom Gilovich that proved that adjustment actually drains your mental battery.
How do they do that?
They had participants answer anchoring questions while physically moving their heads.
You mean like nodding yes or shaking their head no?
That's exactly what they did. They gave them an anchor question. The participants who were instructed to shake their heads back and forth, mimicking the physical act of rejection, they actually adjusted further away from the anchor. Their estimates were less biased.
No way. So the physical act of saying no helped their brain think more independently.
It seems to. It seems to facilitate the mental rejection of the anchor. It's like the body is priming the mind to disagree. But conversely, the people who were nodding their heads up and down stayed much closer to the anchor.
Okay, but what's the connection to mental effort?
Here's the most important part of their findings. They discovered that adjustment is work. It requires your system to attention. They found that when people's minds were tired or cognitively depleted, maybe they were trying to hold a long string of digits in their memory at the same time.
Or they'd had a few drinks.
Precisely. Or if they were slightly intoxicated or just exhausted after a long day. When your mental resources are depleted, you adjust less. You stick much, much closer to the anchor. Your system, too, basically says, look, I'm too tired to figure out exactly where the right answer is, so this seems close enough, I'll just stop here.
This is a huge practical takeaway then. Do not negotiate a salary or the price of a house at a bar or after a long flight or when you're mentally exhausted.
Absolutely not.
You literally lack the cognitive energy to fight the anchor that's been put on the table. You will agree to a number closer to their initial offer simply because your brain wants to stop doing the hard work of thinking.
Your brain will take the path of least resistance, and that path leads right back to the anchor.
Okay, so that covers adjustment, the deliberate, effortful System 2 process. Now let's look at the second mechanism, the one the author of our text championed, priming, System 1. This one feels, more insidious to me because it happens automatically. We don't even know we're doing it.
Yeah. It is more mysterious, for sure. This is the mechanism that applies to those truly absurd anchors, like, was Gandhi 144 years old? As we said, no one consciously adjusts down from 144. It's too crazy. But the number triggers what the author calls associative coherence.
Okay, break that down for me. Associative coherence. It sounds pretty technical.
It's simpler than it sounds. Your System 1, your automatic storytelling brain, it just wants the world to make sense. It hates confusion and contradiction. When it hears the words Gandhi and 144 in the same sentence for a split second, it tries to construct a reality where that could be true. It's automatically checking for compatibility.
So it involuntarily starts pulling up memories and ideas associated with the concept of very, very old.
That's it, exactly. Wrinkles, frailty,
Wow.
ancient history, wisdom. It activates an entire network of ideas related to extreme old age. Those ideas are now primed. They've been brought out of the filing cabinet and they're floating at the top of your consciousness.
So when the second question comes, okay, so how old was he really? You reach into your bucket of available ideas, and what do you find?
You find all the old ideas, you find wrinkles and ancient and frail, so your guess naturally skews high. You are basing your final estimate on a biased sample of your own knowledge, which has been selectively activated by that absurd anchor.
There was a fascinating experiment about temperature that really solidified this for me, the one by Musweiler and Strack.
Yes, this study is brilliant because it explicitly links numbers to words, proving it's not just a numerical bias, it's about concepts. So they asked one group of participants, is the mean annual temperature in Germany higher or lower than 20 degrees Celsius?
Which is about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, a pretty pleasant day.
Right, a warm anchor. Then they asked another group, is it higher or lower than 5 degrees Celsius, which is about 40 degrees Fahrenheit? A cold day.
So warm anchor and a cold anchor. Got it.
Correct. But here's the clever part. Right after asking that anchoring question, they briefly flashed words on a computer screen and asked people to identify them as quickly as possible.
And what happened?
The people who had just been anchored to the warm temperature, 68 degrees, they recognized summer-themed words significantly faster. Words like sun and beach.
And I'm guessing the cold group.
They recognized winter words faster. Frost, ski, ice.
That is incredible. So the number isn't just a number. It physically acts as a spotlight in your brain, lighting up one specific storage room full of memories and leaving all the others in the dark.
That is the perfect analogy. And this has massive, massive implications for marketing and sales. They found this with car brands specifically. When they gave people high anchors for German car prices, it primed them to think of luxury brands like Mercedes and Audi.
But low anchors.
Low anchors primed them to think of mass market brands like Volkswagen.
So if a car dealer just casually mentions a high price, even if it's for a different car, or even if he's just talking about the economy in general, he is essentially preloading my brain with luxury thoughts before I even look at the car he's trying to sell me.
Exactly. He's setting the scene. He's deciding which part of your brain is going to evaluate the product you're about to see. If he anchors you high, you're going to be looking for quality, for prestige, for justification for that price. If he anchors you low, you're going to be looking for value and compromise.
I want to move on to measurement. We know this happens. We know there are two ways it happens. But how strong is it, really? Is it a gentle nudge, or is it a powerful shove? The source talks about something called the anchoring index.
Right. Scientists love to quantify things. The anchoring index is a really simple ratio they develop to measure exactly how much an anchor influences a final judgment. It's the ratio of the difference between the two groups' estimates to the difference between the two anchors they were given.
Okay, let's apply that to the redwood tree experiment mentioned in the source to make it really concrete.
Yeah.
I hate abstract math, so give me the trees.
Okay, the trees. So researchers stood outside the San Francisco Exploratorium and asked visitors about the height of the tallest redwood tree. They gave one group a very high anchor. They asked, is the tallest redwood taller or shorter than 1,200 feet?
And the other group?
They got a very low anchor. Is it taller or shorter than 180 feet?
Okay, so that is a huge gap. 1,020 feet difference between the high anchor and the low anchor.
A massive difference. Now let's look at the average estimates the two groups gave. The high anchor group guessed, on average, 844 feet. The low anchor group guessed, on average, 282 feet.
So the difference between the actual guesses was, let's see, 562 feet.
Exactly. The anchors were about 1,000 feet apart, and the final guesses ended up being over 500 feet apart.
So you just divide one by the other?
Right. You divide the difference in guesses, which was 562, by the difference in the anchors, which was 1,020, and you get about 0.55 or 55%. That is the anchoring index.
So put simply, for every foot you increase the anchor, the average estimate increases by roughly half a foot.
That's it, and that is a huge influence. If someone throws out a number in a negotiation, they are literally pulling you more than halfway toward it. A 55% index is a very typical finding in these kinds of studies.
But surely, I mean, experts have to be immune to this, right?
Yeah.
This is the question I always come back to when I read this stuff. If I'm a professional, a real estate agent, a judge, a stock trader, I know the value of things.
Yeah.
I have training. I have experience. I'm not going to be swayed by some random number.
You would hope so, wouldn't you? This is the ego trap. This is the great delusion of expertise. The research shows that expertise does not immunize you against anchoring. What it does is arguably worse.
Worse. How?
It immunizes you against admitting that you were anchored.
Oh, wow. Okay, walk us through the real estate experiment. This one seems like a direct attack on professional competence.
It really is. They took a group of professional real estate agents, people who price homes for a living. They brought them to a house that was actually on the market. They let them walk through it, inspect the foundation, look at the neighborhood, and they gave them a comprehensive booklet of information, all the data they would normally use to price a home.
So they aren't just guessing in the dark. They have the actual facts.
They have all the facts. But here's the manipulation. Half of the agents received a booklet with a listing price that was significantly higher than the actual list price. The other half saw a listing price that was significantly lower.
And then they just had to estimate what a reasonable buying price for the house would be.
Yep. Now, here is the brilliant twist. They also ran this exact same experiment with a group of business school students. No real estate experience whatsoever, just smart kids.
And the question is, who did better? Who was less biased?
Well, let's look at the anchoring index. For the business students, the index was 48%. They were heavily, heavily influenced by the bogus listing price.
Okay, that's kind of expected. They're amateurs. They probably leaned on the list price because they didn't know any better.
Exactly. Now, for the professional real estate agents, the people who do this for a living, the index was 41%.
Whoa. Wait a minute. 48% for the students, 41% for the pros. That is barely a difference.
It is statistically almost the same. The professionals were nearly as susceptible to the anchor as the total amateurs were. But here is the delusion of expertise I was talking about. When they were interviewed afterwards, the students admitted it. They said, yeah, the listing price probably influenced me a bit.
They were self-aware. They were honest.
For the professionals, they insisted vehemently that the listing price had zero effect on their judgment.
They denied it completely.
Completely. They said things like, oh, I didn't even look at that. I looked at the square footage, the market comps, the condition of the roof. They confabulated this complex, rational reason for their price, completely blind to the fact that the number in the booklet had set their baseline from the very beginning.
That is genuinely frightening. It suggests that in any field medicine, law, finance, the expert opinion we rely on might just be an anchored guess wearing a very expensive suit.
It absolutely suggests that. Expertise allows you to generate better, more convincing rationalizations for your anchored decision, but it doesn't necessarily stop the anchoring from happening in the first place.
Speaking of experts who hold people's fates in their hands, we absolutely have to talk about the judges.
The German judge study. This is, for my money, the single most unsettling example in the entire file.
I agree. This made me angry when I read it. It feels like a fundamental violation of the social contract.
It really does. It exposes a deep, deep flaw in our concept of justice. So the researchers took a group of experienced German judges. These guys had an average of 15 years on the bench. Very senior people.
Yeah.
They gave them a detailed description of a shoplifting case. A woman was caught stealing. They got all the facts of the case. And before they decided on her sentence, the researchers introduced the anchor. But they did it in the most blatant, most absurdly random way possible.
They had the judges roll a pair of dice.
Dice. In a sentencing hearing context.
It's unbelievable.
And not just any dice. These were loaded dice. They were rigged so that when you rolled them, they would only stop on two possible numbers, 3 or 9.
So the judge rolls the dice stop. Then what?
Then the researchers asked two questions. First, would you sentence her to more or less months in prison than the number that just came up on the dice? And finally, what exact sentence would you give?
Now, logically, the dice roll is pure chance. It is meaningless. It has nothing to do with the crime, the law, the defendant, or justice. A judge, of all people, should be able to compartmentalize that and ignore it.
You would think. It's their job. But the judges who ruled a 9 sentenced the woman to an average of 8 months in prison.
8 months. Okay. And the ones who rolled a 3?
Those who rolled a 3 sentenced her to an average of 5 months.
That's a 3-month difference. That's a 50% anchoring effect. A roll of the dice. A literal piece of plastic tumbling on a table cost that imaginary woman 3 extra months of her life.
It shows that randomness permeates the justice system in ways we don't want to admit. We think of justice as this blind scale, carefully weighing evidence. But if a judge just happens to glance at a clock or sees a case number or checks the temperature on a thermostat before making a decision, that number could theoretically anchor the sentencing.
It just undermines the entire concept of objective justice. If the random environment dictates the sentence, then where is the fairness?
It's a very sobering realization, and it extends beyond the courtroom to how we value things that are very hard to price,
Yeah.
like the environment. This is the seabird study.
Right. How much is a seabird worth? It's not something you can buy at Walmart. There's no market price.
Exactly. It's an emotional value, not a market value. When people are asked how much they would donate to save 50,000 birds from an offshore oil spill, they have to translate their feeling, their moral outrage, or their sadness into a dollar amount.
This is what the source calls intensity matching.
Yes. You feel a certain intensity of emotion, you want to match that intensity with a corresponding dollar amount.
Yeah.
But the scale is missing. You don't know if very sad equals $10 or $100 or $1,000.
So the anchor provides the scale. It tells you what sad costs today.
That's exactly it. When visitors were asked to donate with no anchor mentioned at all, the average donation was $64.
Okay, that's the baseline.
But when they were first asked a low anchor question, would you be willing to pay $5? The average donation plummeted to just $20.
So the low anchor effectively told them, this is a small problem, don't feel too bad about it.
Correct. And when they were hit with a really high anchor, the question was, would you be willing to pay $400?
The average jumped to what?
The average donation jumped to $143.
Wow. The difference between the anchors drove the donations up by huge margins. The analysis in the source showed that for every $100 they increased the initial request, it brought a return of $30 in the average willingness to pay.
It's an incredible return on investment.
This explains why charities always suggest those specific amounts on the donation form, with the little boxes. $50, $500, $500. They are setting the anchor. If they just left it as a blank line, they would get so much less money.
It's manipulation, plain and simple. Or, effective fundraising, depending on your perspective.
Let's talk for a minute about when this backfires. The source discusses the idea of capping awards in personal injury lawsuits. This is a huge political topic.
It is. Big corporations and insurance companies, they often lobby for legal caps on damages. They say, we shouldn't have to pay more than, say, $1 million for pain and suffering. They think this will limit their financial losses.
And logically, on the surface, it does. It cuts off those crazy multi-million-dollar verdicts you hear about.
It absolutely eliminates the outliers. It lowers the ceiling. But there is a nasty, unintended side effect. The cap becomes an anchor.
Ah, I see where this is going. So if the legal cap is $1 million, suddenly that number is in every single juror's head during deliberations.
Exactly. Before the cap existed, a jury might have looked at a medium severity injury and decided to award $200,000. But now they see that the official legal cap is $1 million. That $1 million number acts as a powerful anchor, and it pulls all the smaller awards upward. It makes $500,000 look reasonable by comparison.
So the intended effect, saving the company's money, might actually be canceled out or even reversed by the anchor pulling up the average award for all the smaller, more common cases.
That's the danger. So who benefits? The most serious offenders and the massive firms, they avoid the $10 million payouts. But all the smaller cases become much more expensive to settle. It raises the floor while it's lowering the ceiling. It's a classic example of public policy not accounting for basic human psychology.
Let's bring this down to the most everyday level. We've talked about judges and oil spills, but what about the supermarket? The source has a great simple example about Campbell's soup.
The Sioux City, Iowa experiment. This is a lesson for every single time you walk into a grocery store.
So the setup was simple. Campbell's soup was on sale, 10% off, a modest discount.
Right. But the researchers worked with the store to change the signage on different days. On some days, condition A, the sign said limit of 12 per person. On other days, condition B, the sign just said no limit per person.
Now, rationally, a limit shouldn't make you want more soup. It should just stop you from, buying 100 cans. I don't need 12 cans of soup. Nobody needs 12 cans of soup at once.
But what happened? When the sign said no limit, people just bought whatever they needed. A few cans, maybe. But when the sign said limit of 12, shoppers bought an average of 7 cans.
7 cans of soup. That is a lot of soup for one shopping trip.
It was twice as many as they bought when there was no limit.
So why? Is it just that we want what we perceive to be scarce?
That's part of it, for sure. That's the rationing heuristic. We see a limit and we think, oh, this must be a great deal. It must be flying off the shelves if they have to ration it. But the number 12 itself acts as a powerful magnetic pull.
The number itself is the anchor.
The number is the anchor. If the limit had been 5, they probably would have bought an average of 3 or 4 cans. The number 12 anchors the decision of how many should I buy. Somewhere up near 12. You start at 12 and you adjust down, but you get stuck at 7.
I see this on Amazon or eBay all the time. The buy now price, or the estimated value at an auction.
Those are pure anchors. They're not subtle about it. In an auction, that estimated value that's printed in the catalog directly tells the first bidder where to start. If that number is high, the final sale price will almost certainly be higher than if it had been low.
This brings us directly to negotiation. I think this is where our listeners can probably get the most practical, actionable value out of this whole discussion. The anchoring effect strongly suggests there is a huge advantage to going first.
Yes. The conventional wisdom so often says, let the other guy show his cards first, don't bid against yourself. But the science of anchoring says the complete opposite. The first mover sets the anchor, period.
So if I'm selling my house and I list it high, even a little bit higher than I think it's worth, I am anchoring every potential buyer's perception of his value upward.
Precisely. You are defining the range of the entire conversation. If you start high, even their lowball counteroffer will be significantly higher than if you had started at a more reasonable price.
Okay, but what if I'm on the other side of that? What if I walk into a negotiation and the other person sets an anchor that is just, it's outrageous,
Right.
like totally offensive? What's the play?
This is a critical moment in any negotiation. Most people, they try to be polite, they try to play nice, they counter with a reasonable number. But the math shows that if you do that, you've already lost.
Why? Why is that a losing move?
Because if they say $1 million for something that's worth $100,000 and you counter with $100,000, the psychological middle is still way, way too high. You're just shouting at each other across this giant, unbridgeable canyon that they created.
So what is the move? The source was very specific and very dramatic here.
The move is to make a scene.
Make a scene. Like flip the table.
Well, a controlled bit of drama. You have to storm out, or at least threaten to. You have to clearly, and maybe even a little emotionally, reject the anchor itself.
So you can't just politely say, I'm sorry, that's too high.
Yeah.
No, because if you keep talking, the anchor is still on the table. It is still in the room, influencing you subconsciously. You have to de-anchor the conversation immediately and forcefully. You have to say something like, look, I cannot continue this negotiation with that number on the table. It is not even a legitimate starting point. We need to start over, or I'm leaving.
You have to wipe the whiteboard clean. You have to reset the whole game.
Exactly. You have to force them to remove their anchor before you can proceed. Otherwise, even if you think you're negotiating tough, you are negotiating in the shadow of their number, and you will lose.
That is some bold advice. But it makes perfect sense. If the number itself is like a cognitive virus, you have to quarantine it immediately.
That's a great way to put it.
So, is it hopeless? I mean, are we just doomed to be dragged around by random numbers our whole lives? Or can we fight back? The source mentions mobilizing system 2.
There is hope, but it requires real work. We can't just trust our gut because, as we've seen, our gut is the very thing that's getting anchored.
So what is the strategy? How do we defend ourselves?
The psychologists Adam Galinsky and Thomas Musweiler proposed a very specific technique. They call it thinking the opposite.
Thinking the opposite.
It is exactly what it sounds like. When someone drops an anchor on you, you must actively, consciously, and deliberately search your memory for arguments against that anchor.
So if a car dealer says, this car's worth $30,000, I shouldn't just start thinking, well, maybe I can get it for 28.
No. You should stop the conversation, even if it's just in your own head, and force yourself to list all the reasons why it is not worth $30,000. Look for the dents. Look at the high mileage. Think about the minimum offer they would probably accept. Think about how much it's costing them in interest to keep that car on the lot every single day.
So you are trying to consciously break that associative coherence we talked about earlier. You're trying to activate all the memories and facts that the anchor tried to suppress.
Yes. You are manually overriding the priming effect. It negates the biased recruitment of thoughts that System 1 does automatically, but And this is the big but, it is effortful. It does not happen automatically. You have to actively stop the conversation and engage your system 2 brain.
It really sounds like we all need to be much more vigilant, more suspicious of numbers that are just handed to us.
We do. We need to treat any number presented to us in a negotiation or a sale as a potential weapon being used against us.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on the more philosophical side of this. The source ends on a pretty deep and frankly unsettling note about agency and autonomy.
This is the part of the research that keeps me up at night. We all walk around with this subjective sense of free will. We think, I chose to buy these 7 cans of soup, or I chose to sentence this shoplifter to 8 months, or I chose to donate $20.
We feel like we are the authors of our thoughts and decisions.
Right. But this research shows that a screensaver, or a roll of the dice, or a price tag on a shelf might have actually made that choice for you long before you were even consciously aware of it.
It really threatens our entire sense of who we are. If the random environment can push our thoughts around without us even noticing, then how free are we, really?
The scariest single line in the source, for me, was this. You are always aware of the anchor, but you are never aware of how it changed your mind.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? You can't feel the anchoring happening. You can't A/B test your own brain. You can't imagine what you would have thought if the anchor had been different. You only know what you think right now.
And what you think right now is tethered to that first number you heard.
So here is our final provocative thought for everyone listening. The next time you see a number, whether it's a limit 12 sign on a can of soup, a salary range in a job description, or even just a random statistic in a news headline, stop. Just for a second, pause.
And ask yourself this question. How is this number rewriting the arguments in my head right now?
Am I thinking this because it's true, or am I thinking this because that number just made me think it?
De-anchor yourself. Actively think the opposite.
And maybe, just maybe, you'll take back a little bit of control from the rigged wheel of fortune.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
See you next time.